The things we've been through, one thing after another after another. I'm sorry. We're not a team. We're a family. Let us have that. Today on the Comic Book Report, Guardians of the Galaxy by Al Ewing. Stick around and check it out. Greetings from the galaxy, everyone. My name is Dominic, and today you're tuning into the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I'm diving back into the world of Guardians of the Galaxy with the Al Ewing one, presented in one massive trade paperback from Marvel Comics. I'm really excited to review this title today, but before we do, just a special thank you to our channel sponsor, Organic Price Books. If you're looking for your own collected editions, I highly encourage you check out their website. You can find their link in the description for this video. And hey, if you find something you like, you can even use my discount code at checkout, TheComicBookReport, to receive $2 off of your order. Please note, if you use my affiliate code or link to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support the channel. Thank you for considering. Now let's get started with this Cosmic Marvel review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written by Al Ewing and illustrated primarily by Juan Cabal, Marcio Takara, and Adam Gorham. The comics in this volume were published initially by Marvel Comics beginning in 2017. The volume itself collects Guardians of the Galaxy, the 2020 series, issues 1 through 18, Rocket, the 2017 series, issues 1 through 6, and materials from Guardians of the Galaxy Annual 2021, issue 1. And finally, this collection is a glossy paper-stocked book with a glued binding and is a standard-size paperback coming in at 576 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that paperback collection from Marvel Comics. Right from the jump, this thing is very akin to something like a Marvel Epic collection as far as the size. It's a 500-something page book, a standard size paperback with a glued binding, and overall, it's a dense paperback collection. I know Marvel also has those saga editions and complete collections, and this is really similar to one of those. This is the entire Al Ewing Guardians of the Galaxy run with that Rocket miniseries thrown in there. I was kind of hoping to see this as an omnibus. I had heard really popular things about this run, but here we are with a paperback. Who knows, one day they might upgrade over at Marvel. The images on the front and back cover are both lifted from covers of issues in this collection, so you get a good sampling of some of the art you can expect. I really like it. I love this picture of Star-Lord on the back. It's just really evocative and interesting. I was right away excited to dive into this collection. Before we dive in though, I just want to do a quick look at the binding. Like I said, it's glued and pretty standard for what you can find in a lot of their other paperbacks at Marvel. No real issues from me here, a little bit of gutter loss that you'll see throughout the book as I flip through, but nothing too crazy. Again, it's all what you can kind of expect from a lot of these paperbacks. Okay, and now as we make our way into the collection proper, you can see some of the title pages. They have a mapping by creator of a lot of the different issues in the run here at the front. There is no proper table of contents with page numbers or things like that, but like I said, we have those mapped creator issues at the front that gives you an idea of what's collected and who's behind it. And then right after that, we launch right into that Rocket Raccoon 2017 series, a 6-issue mini-series that I found to be pretty fascinating. I've always liked the character of Rocket, or at least since I was introduced to him in the Guardians of the Galaxy MCU movie some time ago. Just a really captivating character, and I like to see a little mini-series here. The overall vibe of this is kind of a noir meets a heist, with a lot of humor and just madcap adventures mixed in. I think overall it was really interesting. I liked the kind of narrative devices we had in this. It felt a little bit hard-boiled and interesting. Again, kind of like a noir. We had an interesting style choice in these issues as well, where we'd have a lot of like exposition expositional narration information on the left side of these pages, and then all the paneling kind of on the right side, as you'll see as I flip through here. This was something I saw throughout the whole miniseries, and I did feel like I got a little bit tired of it as I made my way toward the end, but the storyline really helped me just glue in. I think it was really, really kind of an interesting look at Rocket. I think for fans of the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 that came out not too long ago, this has some interesting pieces from Rocket's past that I think inform some of what I saw on film in some ways. It was obviously quite a bit different, but there are just some recurring characters I noticed that transferred across onto the big screen, which I did like seeing. Overall, as I mentioned, it feels kind of like a noir meets a heist narrative, which was interesting. Some of the characters that showed up in this Rocket miniseries that really genuinely surprised me is the TechNet. This group of characters is super fascinating. A lot of different powered individuals. They're usually villains. In this case, they're kind of mercenaries almost that eventually end up teaming up with Rocket for the heist. I was first familiar with these characters in the pages of Excalibur over at Marvel, so I was, suffice it to say, very surprised to see them show up in this Rocket miniseries during kind of interstellar cosmic Marvel. But I think their inclusion was really, really fun. I think the kind of weird romance subplot between Rocket and Gatecrasher was surprising as well, but we had a lot of great Rocket witticisms and snark and humor, and a surprising amount of heart. I think that overall these 6 issues were really, really worth reading. I enjoyed them, and there were areas that I felt it was a bit tiresome. Again, the kind of expositional narrative dumps on the left side of some of the pages, but I still think it worked overall. Really happy to read this. I think that this almost would have made more sense as a standalone trade paperback, which they might have for this series, but I am happy we got it in this complete collection from Al Ewing. And I see why they included it first. Chronologically, it came out a few years before the Guardians of the Galaxy run here, and some things with Rocket in this story inform events that occur in the Guardians run itself. That being said, it was a tad bit jarring to start a Guardians book with this kind of independent little mini-series that was happening with just one of the characters. I felt like a couple issues in, I was really eager to jump into the team book I felt like I was getting here, the Guardians of the Galaxy. But by the end of this mini-series, I felt myself wanting more. That's not to say I wasn't still very excited to jump into the Guardians run proper. Overall, this was a fun run. I am happy I read it. And to be upfront, again, if you haven't seen some of my other videos, I've only read the first half of the Bendis run in the Guardians of the Galaxy by Brian Michael Bendis Omnibus Volume 1, which I reviewed on the channel some time ago. But outside of that, I haven't read any of the Guardians solo stuff. I've seen them in crossovers, I've seen them in like Annihilation and some of those cosmic events, but I hadn't read a ton of other Guardians books, and so I was eager for this run as I had heard good things. But just so you know, as I'm reviewing it, I don't have a complete knowledge of these characters or this title, property, things like that. I am a fan of the movies, and I have enjoyed overall the comics I have read from these characters. Okay, so jumping into the Guardians run itself, I will say this is a pretty solid entry point for new readers. It is clear that other events have transpired with these characters and this team prior to this book. However, when you start the Guardians run with their issue 1, it is kind of resetting the status quo. We have all the Guardians kind of at peacetime. It's sort of a family barbecue with all the Guardians of the Galaxy members. We have Gamora and Star-Lord together and seem to be enjoying this kind of blissful rest period. However, this break is interrupted by Richard Rider, Nova, who comes in warning of kind of a galactic crisis in the form of the Olympians returning with this kind of new cosmic power to kind of take over, take dominion of the galaxy, destroy planets, and kind of do anything that their whims suggest. They are, of course, led by Zeus, and basically Nova says this is a big deal, we need the Guardians to help sort this out, otherwise all of these planets and everyone are in danger. Gamora and some of the Guardians are kind of against getting involved with this crisis, having just overcome presumably many different and like kind of harrowing events. They want to enjoy this respite and this time of relaxation, but right away we have Peter Quill Star-Lord unable to sleep, just knowing that he has to do something about this crisis. He has to guard the galaxy. Who'd have thought it? And so anyway, we have Peter Quill and Rocket and some people kind of leaving in the middle of the night to go help Nova with this crisis. So these first couple issues have to deal with this storyline. Essentially, it's Guardians of the Galaxy versus the Olympians. They're trying to take them down from becoming this, again, cosmic menace and destroying all these people, but they're clearly overpowered and outmatched by the Olympians, but we still have this ragtag group kind of giving it their all. I will say the lineup for the Guardians in this run is a little bit different than the Guardians I'm used to reading something like the Bendis run or seeing the Guardians of the Galaxy movies on screen from the MCU. There are certainly Marvel characters here I'm familiar with to varying degrees, but we have some interesting inclusions in this Guardians lineup, like Moondragon. I think Phyla shows up at one point. We do have Groot. We have some guy named Marvel Boy. At a certain point, Hulkling and Wiccan kind of show up. We have Hercules entering their team before too long, and we even have Doctor Doom joining the Guardians of the Galaxy. More on that later, as that was one of the highlights of this collection from me. At any rate, the lineup was a little bit different from what I'm used to seeing, but I did like it. I think that there were some really good character interactions. But anyway, we have the first iteration of the Guardians team during the Ewing run face off against the Olympians. They basically try to storm the Olympians' kind of base of operations and try to mess with all of their functionality and try to basically destroy them from the inside out as much as possible. We have Moondragon, the kind of resident psychic, kind of blocking the mental reading for these characters so that they can kind of infiltrate their base of operations. But things kind of go sideways. We have Nova getting critically injured, and ultimately we have Star-Lord making essentially a sacrifice play to take out these Olympians. So before too long, the first arc of this book effectively ends, and we have the apparent death of Star-Lord. We have Rocket Raccoon and Nova and all these people having to go back and explain to what happened to the Guardians that were resting back at home, like Gamora, Peter Quill's love interest at the start of this book. It is pretty devastating, and it leads to a really fascinating issue where most of the dialogue in the early issue is just "I am Groot" from all the different characters, so you don't know exactly what they're saying, but from the incredible artwork we have, we get the conveyed sense of grief and anger and just rage and grieving and all these things going on. I will say, for me, I was really surprised they apparently killed Peter Quill so early in this run. I was a little disappointed, as that is definitely a flagship character for me when I think Guardians of the Galaxy, again, largely because of the MCU movies, but I was disappointed, thinking, well, how much of him are we really going to get in this series? But I did notice even the back cover of this paperback collection had an issue cover with him on the front that hadn't occurred yet, so I knew he had to come back in some way in this run. I just didn't know how or when. And so, of course, we basically proceed with this run without Peter Quill for some time. We have Hercules joining the team among some others. And from here, we have a lot of other different cosmic adventures. I will say overall, there are a couple story arcs in this collection, but everything has this sense of cohesion. You feel very much guided from one story to the next, and you feel like you have these large arcs that just slowly build and pay off and unravel and go again. And I just think it really worked as a collection. This was a book that was really easy to read cover to cover. It was fascinating. It was captivating. I will say for the artists involved, it does change hands a few times, but every time it does, I never felt like the art transition was too stark, at least for my reading. The art styles weren't so glaringly different that I was ever taken out of the narrative, and in that way as well, I think the reading experience was very cohesive. I love some of the experimentation we have with the panel layouts. There's some cosmic adventures that have a lot of these like spheres and circles and really unique designs and breaking of the form that led to this kind of trippy cosmic feel, which I think works so well for our Guardians book. I also love the colorists we have attached to this run. Everything just pops so vibrantly. I noticed there does appear to be more of a cooler color palette, some blues and greens and purples. Not that there aren't the other colors, but I do see a lot of that, which I just love. I think it just looks so stylish and beautiful, and it really just pops out of the page. That's the best way I can say it. The art style looks very modern and polished. Some might say too polished, but I know for me, I still really thoroughly enjoyed it, but it is a very modern art-looking book, but I do think the art is just outstanding. The other thing I will say, I'm going to kind of bounce around some plot lines here now, But one thing I want to mention about this book is that this book does occur during a couple different Marvel events. To name a few, we have the Empire event that occurred, we have the King in Black stuff with Null, we have the Last Annihilation, and each of these events are navigated pretty well as far as this Guardians run. In the case of Empire, I haven't read that series myself, but there are some maybe minor spoilers to that event in this book as we deal with that happening and the immediate fallout. Some of the characters that are really prevalent in that event, like Hulkling, show up and have a different role because of that event in this book. But unlike some other collections that have to tie in or deal with different events, I don't feel like we lose too much as far as what happens over there. Even though we don't have a lot of those issues, the events, the actions, it does a good job of giving us kind of the exposition we need without feeling too bogged down with it. I feel like we get just enough to know, hey, this big event happened, this is kind of the takeaway, and this is where we go from here with these characters. So I think in that way, it handled the kind of tie-in around Empire very well. King in Black, it was like, oh shoot, this guy named Null is coming, that's a big deal, but we have our own cosmic issues to deal with, and that was kind of all it was there. So I think that was also handled really well. In the case of the Last Annihilation, this is actually something that occurs at the end of this collection, and it is a predominantly Guardians of the Galaxy centric event, so we have a lot of it transpiring in these issues, to the point where if I didn't know that that was a standalone collection, the Last Annihilation, I would think that this was just all it was. I don't feel like I missed anything. There are no tie-ins that I felt like, oh man, what happened here? I think it all plays out perfectly in these pages, and I actually think it's a great cap to this collection. To a lesser extent, we also have a tie-in issue with like the Hellfire Gala, which I have that collection. I reviewed it some time ago, a big X-Book crossover. I didn't really like it too much, but we do have an issue of Guardians where Nova and Peter Quill Star-Lord go to the first Hellfire Gala over on Krakoa. This issue was a ton of fun. We basically had Nova get in a huge fight with Magneto that was pretty epic, and I loved it. I think if you've read Hellfire Gala, this would have been a really fun inclusion to that collection that I wish they would have had, but you don't need the Hellfire Gala or context at all to enjoy this issue. But if you've read all that and you keep up with some of the X-Men books, this issue was actually one of my favorite standalone issues in the book. Just a lot of fun here. But again, I think overall that's something this collection does well. Because this run was smack in the middle of so many different Marvel events, I think the way it navigated all of them just really worked. There was a clear narrative through line. It again gave you just enough narrative exposition that you were never lost, and this book was still exceedingly easy to read cover to cover. Because of this, I do think it's a great entry point for new readers. Of course, you're missing some backstory, some history, some other things that have happened before, but you can jump in, get to know these characters, and have a good handful of story arcs and a great finale to this book. I think that it all culminates in this one master story arc, The Last Annihilation. You get a really great payoff, and then after that, you have parts from the annual that's kind of a silly story. But I do think that the sense of momentum, pacing, payoff for this book really works well. Again, I'm surprised we didn't get an omnibus treatment. I guess it is a little bit small for an omnibus, but I've seen some really small omnibuses out there. I know the Donny Cates collection was also around this period and was also a smaller collection. Maybe someday we'll see a combined omnibus of both runs. I don't know, a man can dream, but I'm still happy to see that we got this paperback here. A couple other notable stories in this book. We have a really interesting kind of political issue or two around the time that the Empire is occurring, where we have like the Kree-Skrull alliance, and we have this kind of alliance of different planets and factions, and there's basically an assassination that happens during this diplomatic meeting, and it leads into this like full-on investigation and mystery, and that's really fun. We have Rocket playing kind of a detective in that issue, and I think that works really, really well. Some other story arcs I loved. I love when we return to Star-Lord Peter Quill. We find out that in his sacrifice play, he ended up absorbing a lot of the energy from these Olympian characters and somehow transporting himself across the universe, and he ends up in this place where time moves differently or something. He's empowered even more as the Star-Lord with like powers of the sun and powers from the Olympians, and somehow he ages super slowly across hundreds of years. He ends up finding maybe a new partner, maybe having a child, maybe living this whole separate life that we have across this issue, only to eventually return back to his part of the universe, to his Guardians, to help try to save the day again. We're really introduced to a different Star-Lord here who's lived this whole other long life, who is then thrown right back into the mix of all his Guardians' duties. We have a very clear and immediate rift between him and Gamora, and we haven't even kind of weird estrangement between him and his friend Nova, but they kind of work through it throughout this book for the most part. I think it works. I did want to see more of Star-Lord and Gamora together, but we have this kind of weird breakup, fizzling out situation happening. But it still worked, and I think that bringing Star-Lord back in this way was certainly fascinating. Seeing the character differences, even from what we saw at the beginning of this book, it was just really interesting and well done. Another story arc in this book has to do with Ego the Living Planet, who basically becomes an egg or a shell to basically birth into this world Dormammu, and this ends up leading into that last Annihilation storyline. Immediately before this, we have Dr. Doom showing up and basically warning the Guardians that the universe is out of sync or out of check, something bad's happening, and he needs to help save the day. Again, these are all great stories. I love the inclusion of Dr. Doom, who really can't just stay in his lane. He wants to conquer. He wants to be bigger than it all. If it's something big happening, of course Doom has to be there. And so the whole time, you have Doom basically on the Guardians of the Galaxy, and almost no one trusts him, but he does play an instrumental role. But of course, he has his own machinations and secondary objectives that no one else really knows about. But this really added a lot of flair and interest in the back half of this book. I loved having Doom involved. I saw it on the cover of this collection, and I couldn't wait to see how he fit in here. I'm definitely a big Fantastic Four fan, and Doom in particular is one of Marvel's best characters in my opinion. At any rate, we have a great conclusion where basically the Guardians and Doom and everyone try to take down Dormammu. And I think like I said, the payoff is exquisite, it's incredible, and it leads to, in many ways, a happy ending to this book. I really loved it. Again, I thought everything paid off really well. And after that, we have material from the annual where we have Hercules dealing with probably the silliest character in this book. And we have kind of a He-Man knockoff issue. It's super silly, but kind of a fun little footnote at the end of this collection. After that, we do have some extras at the back of the book, including a variant cover art gallery. Would have loved to see more full-page variant covers rather than the kind of thumbnail format we have at the back, which you will see. But that really rounded out this book. There are a couple story arcs I've glossed over or haven't really talked to in depth, but I tried to highlight some of my favorites in this book. I will say overall this was a really fun collection. I certainly understand why this run got a lot of positive reviews and buzz. I think it's a lot of great science fiction adventures. There's a surprising amount of detective issues in here, especially with the inclusion of that Rocket Raccoon miniseries. But overall, a lot of great galactic cosmic Marvel fare here. It brings in a lot of great characters to the Guardians roster, as well as just secondary characters or cameos. There's a lot of great appearances in this book. The art is always consistently strong, particularly if you like that more polished modern style. I think everything was vibrant and lush and really just jumped out of the page. That being said, even though we had a lot of great character moments overall in this collection, the actual team didn't really do it for me as much as what I read in the Bendis run so far. I think for me, I definitely just connected with that group and the way Bendis wrote the characters maybe a little bit more than I did during this Ewing run. I do think that it really shined with some unique storylines here, and it took these characters in directions I certainly didn't expect when I first picked up this book. It was definitely worth reading in my mind. I think for Cosmic Marvel fans, this is definitely one that you should be interested in, but it didn't really jump out at me. I think I've enjoyed what I read of Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk a little bit better than this collection, but I was still happy to read it. Again, a great paperback from Marvel, especially collecting an entire run and that miniseries from Al Ewing in one big paperback collection. And now I think all that's left is to give this book a grade. For its gorgeous, detailed, and frankly lush artwork throughout, coupled with some very fun cosmic Marvel adventures, the Comic Book Report has to give Guardians of the Galaxy by Al Ewing, the paperback, a B-. This was certainly an above-average collection for me, but it didn't wow me as much as even the Bendis run on this title seemed to. I think that there were a lot of very notable inclusions as far as the characters go. I think Victor Von Doom in particular was a ton of fun to see. I love the way it weaved through a lot of big Marvel events without losing much, and I think overall this was a fun book to read cover to cover. This would certainly interest more of those who are interested in these cosmic Marvel characters, rather than the straight-up New York vigilante superhero fare we usually read from Marvel, but this book might not be for everyone. It's a great deal to get this all in one big collection, but it certainly does have a particular audience. But let me know what you think of this Guardians run. Perhaps I'm mistaken. At any rate, I'd love to hear from more of you. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Don't forget to leave this video a like, and maybe check out one of my other videos. And until next time, have a good one.